All right, welcome to Bruise News. I'm here with Paul Fontaine and our special guest, Chris Samsa, who, if you were paying attention in our Facebook group, he was teasing this AEW New Japan co-promotion here, which on Wednesday, Tony Khan mentioned they were doing a pay-per-view called The Forbidden Door. Chris Samsa, what is going on?
Hello. Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's just get right to the nitty-gritty here. This show, I think, at least this is how I felt when AEW first came to be, when the teases came out that they were doing something. I think a lot of us expected, like working agreement with New Japan, sort of dream promotion, having a partner kind of taking on WWE. And that was kind of like the fans who were into these dream matches. That was like, oh, can't wait, New Japan and AEW. And then very little happened on that regard, especially early on. Now, there's been some bits and pieces. We've seen Minoru Suzuki in a pay-per-view. We've seen Kenta on shows. But this is the real first step, it feels like, in some sort of working agreement. Tell me a little bit about what you think is happening here.
Well, I think the powers that be have finally landed on some sort of agreement that will allow them to cross promote, whether that just be big events or wrestlers appearing cross promotionally for time periods. I think that we're going to see a lot more of that, and I think this has probably been in the works for a little while now, and we're finally seeing that specifically travel to Japan is significantly easier and more approachable, I think, for people who make their money per date, essentially, where they don't have to sit out for 2 weeks just to wrestle for, say, 2 weeks in Japan. Now travel that direction is a lot easier. I think New Japan has been, I guess humbled is maybe the right word in the sense of the pandemic breaking down their business a little bit. And then I think just seeing proof of concept, right? So AEW kind of did a proof of concept with Impact. And I think that New Japan was probably really attentive to that and saw how it affected either Impact's business or AEW's business for that matter. And now they're, I think, a little more open to AEW as a official partner, right? New Japan really likes to have official partners, and for a very long time in the US, their official partner was Ring of Honor. And obviously Ring of Honor saw a significant decline in business and then eventually the sale to Tony Khan. So whether that opened up the door, no pun intended, officially, that may have had something to do with it. Now that Ring of Honor was officially, at least in a different state, then it opens up the opportunity for a new official United States partner. So, and I think it's a two-way street. So, and I think we'll probably end up talking about that as the time goes on today.
So you mentioned the ROH piece, which is an interesting piece. Do you know if there was a contract between the two companies that AEW inherited, or like how does that whole thing work? Because like you said, this has been a very important thing for New Japan. It's like, oh, they have their American company that they work with, which is ROH, and thus that's who they're going to continue working with.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's a contract per se, but I think that there's a pretty official agreement, and we see that publicly a little bit more with Mexico, where they will put out an agreement with CMLL, a joint statement that these two companies are going to work together. And I think part of that is CMLL trying to keep away from AAA, because those two companies absolutely don't get along. So CMLL likes to make sure that everyone knows that they are the New Japan, buddy promotion in Mexico. So when it comes to the US side of things, I doubt that there is any sort of like contractual agreement besides honor. I mean, again, no pun intended, but truthfully, like the honor system of like, this is how it's going to work. We're going to send you some of our excursion guys. We'll run co-promoted shows for a long time. Honor Rising was a 3 or 4 day event at Korakuen Hall early in the year in Japan. So, what's most interesting to me going forward with the AEW relationship is, what does that look like in Japan? Are there
Mhm.
Japanese events that bring over the whole, a big segment of the roster? What is that going to look like? Or is it this one big event type thing that they're obviously kicking things off with in the US?
Go for it, Paul.
How do you think this affects the relationship with Impact, given that we've seen a lot of New Japan guys on Impact? Is it part of it? Is it separate? Do they not even care because it's so small potatoes?
That's hard for me to say. I think the New Japan Impact relationship is really strong, and you see that with all these New Japan or New Japan adjacent guys spending a lot of time on those Impact tapings.
When you say strong, do you mean New Japan strong, or was it just another?
I'm
honest question.
All sorts of puns.
Okay.
No,
I didn't mean it like I didn't.
Yeah.
I wasn't
No.
sure if you, okay.
No, I think potentially you might be onto something there, where that's the level that appears on Impact.
Okay.
Right. And then New Japan proper, or New Japan main roster, I guess, however you want to term it. I think that's the relationship that's going to cross over to AEW. So there may actually be something there in the sense of segmenting out those relationships, but keeping them both healthy. And I think Impact is probably self-aware enough to be okay with that. And every now and then you're still going to see a guy like Jay White or Kenta or somebody of that level, cross over into the Impact space. I think that these three companies, and then even branching out to, in Japan and the New Japan and Noah thing that happened, I think all of these companies have recognized that working together is healthy. And it's almost a throwback to the old territory system, just globally, where some guys can leave the territory for a little while and go work somewhere else and have a good arc, and then come back to kind of the homeland and be freshened up and maybe have learned something and grow. I mean, look at Chris Jericho, right? He left WWE, or he stepped out from WWE, and he went to New Japan as a guy and proved that he was still a star. And now he's a whole different person than he was 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when he was in WWE. And he grew and he learned what the industry could look like outside of those doors. And, there's some risk involved with that, with wrestlers wanting to go somewhere permanently, of course. But if the relationships remain healthy and honest and fruitful on all sides, then I don't see any reason why Impact wouldn't continue to be involved in whatever way they are right now.
You used an interesting word when you were talking about New Japan being open for business in this relationship. You said humbled, and it makes me think back to 2019, where New Japan seemed to be crazy hot and was kind of like, they're going to start doing business here in the US and bring some of these guys over. I went to a few New Japan US shows in the past. There was the Long Beach show and, in SoCal. And then because of the pandemic, all of a sudden things changed. But I know there have been issues with leadership on the New Japan US side, as far as marketing and what buildings to run, what markets to run. And this is just how I feel. I feel like New Japan, whoever is making these leadership decisions, kind of done a bad job so far in coming into this market, maybe not completely understanding their value to the US market. And so, first question is mostly like, who is running things on the New Japan US side? Because I know back when, gosh, I forget the guy's name who was the New Japan president.
Harold Mage.
Harold. I know Harold. I think there was a little bit of a conflict in that Harold may have wanted to do more, and then there was other people involved who were marketing US. So I guess who is running that, and is this going to be something where AEW probably leads the marketing because AEW is really hot, or is there going to be do you think it is going to be sort of a real co-promotion?
As far as I know, and as far as I've been told whenever I ask, or whoever I've asked, is that the US side of New Japan is being run by the same people that are running the Japanese side. And Obari, who's now the president the total president of New Japan was the person that had been heading up the U.S. Expansion prior to COVID-19, prior to Harold leaving, and then he stepped into just the president role. So I guess that answers at least my understanding of that situation, is that it's run by the same people. The booking is done by the same people through some liaisons, right, who are on the ground here. And I think people can probably read between the lines of who's probably involved in that. But I think officially the booking is done by the same group of people that are booking in Japan. So, and then the business side of things is handled by the same business people as far as I know. And it's hard to get a clear answer about some of that stuff. Yeah. And because I don't know that it necessarily makes a ton of difference, but I think when it comes to understanding the US market, I think there has been some struggles. And I think that their initial attempt at really creating New Japan of America was to create a touring brand the same way they're a touring brand in Japan, instead of, I think, what they've kind of transitioned to now, which is focusing on some tentpole events, right? Maybe 6 bigger events per year, and then some TV stuff, right? I mean, TV tapings essentially. And I think that that's a good compromise to where they were trying to go, where they were doing these like 6, 8, 10-day tours regionally that weren't drawing very well, and they were using mostly local talent and a couple of New Japan stars. So I think now New Japan sees that sending their guys over is good, and it gives them a chance to do something different, and then also work indies and make themselves some money, to be perfectly honest. That doesn't come out of New Japan's pocket.
So, but would you expect AEW to really lead the marketing piece, because they're the ones with the TV in the US? Yeah. They're the brand that's really hot. Like I made this comparison, and I'm actually interested in what you think about this. The DC show, which is Moxley and Tanahashi, I think I forget the exact number of tickets, but less than I would have thought for that match. And in the back of my head, I thought, well, you stamp the AEW logo on that, and it probably does 2 or 3 times as much currently. So that is kind of where I'm coming from with that question. Is I think AEW, because of their foothold in the US currently, I think if they lead the marketing, the US audience really feels like this is something special.
Well, let's just look at the buildings in Chicago, right? I mean, so I sat in Windy City Riot, and it was sold out at 2,250 tickets, and it was hot. It was a great crowd.
And with Moxley and Ospreay as a main event, that could be a big main event in a bigger building if promoted correctly.
100%. Yeah. And I think there were more tickets to be sold to that event. But when I look at Chicago and buildings, they were you go from there to the Sears Center, right? Like that's the gap in Chicago. There's no 5,000-6,000 person venue in Chicago. Or Chicago.
You got to open one, man. You got to open one.
Listen, it might be fruitful. It might. Yeah. But I mean, that's the God's honest truth, is that like you go from these, 22, 23, 2,500 to 10,000, and like what's, the optics are different if you sell out 2,500 versus sell 5,000 in a 10,000 building. So in that sense, I think they're actually making better decisions, where they just booked a building they knew they could sell out, and it was going to be great, right? And then you co-promote a show with AEW, and you put it in the freaking United Center, which is the largest indoor building almost in America, to be perfectly honest. I mean, it's one of the bigger arenas even. So, and it's going to sell out. It's going to sell out in minutes, and it's going to be a big deal. And so AEW has that cachet built up where I actually think both companies have this cachet built up where they're trusted. And you see New Japan on if you're a New Japan fan and you've caught up and you've kept up, you trust that they're going to give you a good show. And same deal with AEW. I think if AEW comes to your town and you're a wrestling fan and you've been paying attention, you trust that it's going to be a good show. And then you put it back together. That's where, I mean, you put those two companies together, now this show will build a lot of trust that future co-promoted events will be a big deal. And so it's kind of a matter of what they end up doing with it.
All right. Well, I'll let Paul get to his next thing, but if people who are watching want to ask a question or throw a comment in there, just add it, and we'll see if we'll put it up for Chris.
I want to follow up on what Garrett was saying, regards to, whether or not like this being promoted as an AEW product in North America. Now, obviously, there's two different markets. This is going to be on pay-per-view. I assume pay-per-view over there as well. So, I mean, they're going to promote it on their shows, on their New Japan World, all that. But AEW is going to be using Dynamite, and I would think that without that, otherwise, like we see AEW wrestlers on New Japan shows all the time. It feels like every weekend there's one or two all over the place. And I look at like Moxley Tanahashi, for instance, as a match that, again, like if AEW is promoting it, I'm not saying it would headline a pay-per-view. If it was for a title, it would. As a non-title match, it's very strong second or third from the top kind of thing. Kind of like Moxley Danielson, that sort of thing for this market. Maybe not in Japan. And, I had a spirited debate with Jeremy Feinstein about, like the meaning of certain guys in this market. And I think there's really four. Jeff Hawkins brought it up on the Dynamite show: Tanahashi, Okada, Naito, and Ibushi. Those are the guys that haven't been overexposed in this market that can have dream matches with just about any, like the top 10 guys in AEW. Any one of those are dream matches. And I think you want to use those, especially Tanahashi, because who knows how long he's going to be able to go at this level. I think you want to get those matches done now. So I guess my question for you would be, if you're putting this card together, are you booking title matches, or are you just booking attraction matches? And if you do only book attraction matches, what kind of business would it do in this market? Because for me, I don't think it's special just to see these guys wrestle. I think there's got to be some stakes. Maybe the first time it would go, but if you book the first time, it's all just these tag team matches like they do in Japan sometime, and maybe like a US title match or a TNT title match, they may not come back for the second one. It would be my worry.
I think you're going to see the major titles on the line, and
Good.
that's just speculation. Like I don't know anything, but I think there's a willingness to do singles matches between the companies, and this DC New Japan show that's going to have Ishii and Kingston, Tanahashi, Moxley, and it looks like Brody King and Suzuki on it.
Ooh.
Like those are the three things that are kind of glaring and set up. And I think Fredericks and QT Marshall, if that means anything to you, but I mean, that's just a different level, right? But same idea, right? Yeah. Right. So there's clearly a willingness to do singles matches. And I think that if you're putting it in a building like the United Center and you wanted to prove this concept that this big show, this big event can work between these, and it can draw and it can make both sides money, which is really what this whole thing comes down to. Maybe it'll be obvious what the outcome's going to be, but I think the titles are still going to be on the line.
Good.
Okay. So to follow up on this, I think if we were all, I mean, Tony Khan is like living his dream, right? He's like fantasy booking for all of us wrestling diehards who always do this in the back of our heads. And CM Punk has a match with Adam Page at Double or Nothing. There's a large discussion going on in our Facebook group about who should win that match. And if you want to get the biggest bang for your buck, the first impression of this AEW New Japan show, you want to build whatever the biggest match is. And let's say that is CM Punk versus Kazuchika Okada, title for title. This fan base is smart enough to see through that kind of match. This isn't WWF versus NWA from 1978, right? Where you can just do a double count out and no finish. And I worry a little bit that you kind of have to have a finish in a match like that, or sort of what Paul says, that there may be less intrigue the next time around because they feel like the fan base feels like they're not being treated properly and as smartly as they are. But then again, if there is some back and forth here between the two companies and you unify the titles, as we've seen New Japan has not been hesitant to do in the last couple of years, and then you bring you can bring them back for big shows, you can do that as well, which I don't know if that's better or worse than just having a Okada go over against somebody on AEW and then Punk go over against somebody on New Japan? Like, I'm trying to anticipate what the audience would want out of these matches, because it's not just about the in-ring. In today's wrestling, I feel like the finishes, where it goes next, is so much more important, especially when you're paying money, considering you can watch WWE for $10 a month. You're paying real money for this show. So I'm kind of interested in what your thoughts are on booking finishes and if you would even be worried about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's the most interesting thing to me, because I'm not necessarily I'm not a star rating guy, right? So I'm a booking guy. So when it comes down to what I pay most attention to, it's the trends in booking, it's the the who's and how's. So here's what I'll say: I don't think you're going to see title for title. Like, I'll be more shocked to see title for title than to not see titles on the line at all. Because I think it minimizes the number of meaningful matches on the card, and I think that's bad. I think that if you put both titles on the line separately, then you've got two big matches, two world title matches, and I think that that's going to come into play, and I think that the booking's already complicated.
Yeah,
and when you add in both champions, unless it's the only way I could see it title for title is if Moxley got involved, because I think it's important to not forget that he's contracted to both companies. He's not an AEW guy who is allowed to work New Japan. He is a person who is contracted with both companies. At least that's been what he has said publicly, and that's what we've kind of seen. I think that there's obviously a priority paid to AEW, as we saw when he got pulled off of the Battle in the Valley show. But I don't know that Tony Khan necessarily has 100% control over his booking the same way he does with probably pretty much everyone else on the roster. And that's, again, speculation and based on what Moxley has said in interviews. So he's the only guy that I could see like carrying around both belts. And I don't see a trajectory to get him to that point right now. So, I think when it comes down to it, I think both titles are going to be on the line, and I think they're going to be on the line separately. And I think that, my bet would be that the AEW title match will be the main event. I don't know if that answers everything you said, but that's kind of where I see this headed. But there's a chance that it's Punk Okada, and Okada's the champ, and that's the biggest match in the United Center where Punk came back to wrestling. I mean, that all makes so much sense to me. You got to figure Punk's going to have a big match, and that's the biggest match he could have. So we'll see.
In your hypothetical booking here, you would think that would mean Adam Page retains, Punk challenges without the title for Okada.
Punk comes out the next Wednesday and said, there's another title out there that's a pretty big deal, and these guys are coming to my city and my town and my building. Okada, let's do this thing, right? It's simple. That's really easy to get to. So, and if that's the case, then to be honest, there's a chance Punk wins that damn title too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, why not? If you can get Punk for, I don't know, 3 dates in Japan, you put the title on him and you let it sit on ice for a little while or whatever during the G1 when they're not going to need it. So let's look at the calendar, right? Like, you got this event, and then 2 weeks later you've got the G1 starting. So there's no defense needed until September, right? And maybe that's at All Out when he loses it to someone back in Japan. There's any number of things you can do, because that title's kind of not needed for a little while the G1 happens. So that totally opens up the door, I think, to the IWGP title match in United Center.
So my thing that I would do, and this is what I had proposed in the book, was I think Punk's winning the title at Double or Nothing, and I know that there's some quite heated debate on who's going to retain the title. I would have Punk defend against a top New Japan guy, have Okada defend against a top AEW guy, and then they do the confrontation and set up the match at All Out as a unified title defense or a title for title. You know, and also I would also have on the undercard either an IC TNT title or a US TNT title defense or a tag team titles, like have a unification match on the undercard and actually have the titles unified, which puts it in the fans' minds that, hey, we're going to have a title for title match in September and the titles actually could get unified. And I would do that with Moxley and Danielson. Have them win the tag team titles Double or Nothing and then unify them with the New Japan titles at this United Center show. That's
very, very intriguing. So I want to take one question from the aforementioned Jeremy Finestone. He wants to know, what do you think about the idea that the trios titles being introduced for the first time on Forbidden Door and Dynamite begins to have New Japan trios title matches there?
Sure.
They have. I mean, they have.
Why
they have
not?
100 titles right now with ROH. What's adding a new one?
and
I mean, ROH has
groups.
ROH has a trios title that they're ignoring. So, and I couldn't even tell you where it landed, or
I think it's the Foundation, but I'm not positive.
I can't. Who else? I guess,
Yeah.
but yeah. See, I don't know. New Japan needs their titles too. So let's not forget that New Japan is a company that operates on its own and is very successful also, right? So and let's not forget that AEW probably wants the benefit of having their guys and their name all over the Tokyo Dome at some point coming up soon, right? So if we're doing 2 nights at the Tokyo Dome still, we're running out of titles to unify in New Japan. So you may as well do one night that's your New Japan show and one night that's New Japan AEW, right? And like maybe that's the direction we're headed. And is that bigger than the United Center? I mean, physically, yeah, right? Is it bigger at scale? Yeah. It's bigger to a lot of those guys that wrestle, so that want to wrestle in the Tokyo Dome. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind in this particular circle that I see the conversations, which are, that New Japan is clearly the number 2 in this relationship, and they probably are, right? But they also carry a lot of weight, and they carry a lot of weight in the industry as a whole. And I'm sure that everyone on the AEW side knows that. And I think sometimes the fan base forgets that, how much legacy New Japan holds and how much respect that they're paid and given. And they will need their title in the fall after the G1, and they will need, I think, they could go without the never 6-man titles for a little while because they kind of sit around for a while and then they have an activity time and then they come back and there's a Korakuen show and maybe they get defended, right? Like that's the title that kind of lives at that level. But I think to just drop one or unify one and make it obvious that it's going to be an AEW guy unifying one, like why not someone like Kenta, right? If he's back and healthy, etc., right? Or Jay White for that matter, because he's clearly made his home base in the US instead of in Japan for now. So I think that, and all those things are really interesting, right? I would love to see the TNT and say the US or the Never title be combined for some period of time. I think that's the level that you could see a unification, tag team too, right? Or to see the AEW, someone on the AEW side of things win the junior tag titles, something like that, right? Like all those undercard titles I think could be in play, but I don't think we're ever going to see a unified AEW and IWGP World Heavyweight Championship. I think they're both too important to drawing at both sides of the ocean.
So I recorded Wrestling Observer Radio this morning with Dave, and we spent a good 25 minutes talking about this show. The one thing I forgot to ask him, I'll bring it up here and get your guys' thoughts. So the last 2 big announcements from Tony Khan. First one was about ROH. Then they did that show WrestleMania weekend. Now this one about New Japan. I feel like the New Japan announcement is so much more interesting, so much more important, has the opportunity to make them so much more money than this ROH thing. And I already feel like the ROH deal is not overlooked, because I'm sure Tony Khan has some long-term plans, but it just makes me wonder what that ROH brand means if this New Japan thing is what the dream is for a lot of the fan base, and the ROH thing is a little bit, sort of lesser to this fan base. Any thoughts about that?
I think the New Japan announcement is a beginning, and the ROH announcement was an end. So beginnings are more exciting than ends usually. Maybe Tony Khan has some long-term play with ROH. I mean, he should. He owns a brand that's got a lot of legacy, right? And I'm sure he does. I'm sure he's trying to put together a lot, I think. But the New Japan deal is it's what everyone wanted in 2019 when this thing was announced. And there's so many reasons why that didn't happen. There's so much conversation about that that you could find elsewhere, but it didn't happen. And it was pretty clear for a little while that it wasn't going to happen. And that's why this became the forbidden door. It was something that wasn't supposed to happen. So, and the ROH deal, they were shoveling dirt on their own grave, and then Tony Khan went and bought them. So, what's exciting about that? Whereas New Japan, yes, they've had a down couple of years, and the pandemic was not kind to them, because New Japan is actually probably the most international pro wrestling company on the planet, where they are dependent on Americans, Australians, people from Mexico, people from the UK getting to Japan, and it becomes this hybrid promotion. And when you can't accomplish all that and you're down to just your domestic talent, it got a little dry, right? So now you see New Japan, the kind of international version of it, coming back to life, and AEW dipping their toe in that, and that's really exciting, because now this whole talent pool is essentially available for New Japan to at least have some access to. And I think that's going to be really important for New Japan going forward.
Paul, does ROH feel a little bit like yesterday's news already?
Well, or maybe it's to use another pun, maybe it's a new beginning. I don't know. I'm excited about ROH, but I've always been an ROH fan. I'm a historian going back,
and there are a lot of people
years
who are like you as well.
So I got two questions for you, Chris. One of them is a quick one, following up on what you just said, and the answer is obvious, but I still want to hear you give it. Do you think that this forbidden door idea is bigger now because we had to wait 3 years for it than it would have been if we could have just done it out of the chute?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Okay. Because I think the fan base never stopped wanting it, and I think a lot of people in wrestling media said it was never going to happen.
Right.
I mean, I can point to Super J-Cast and Dave and Wade Keller and Joe Lanza and all these guys that basically said, like, it ain't happening. The relationship's not good, right? Yeah. Like it wasn't, right? We all know that it wasn't good, and that certain parties were not interested. So, and then some of those parties are gone. Some of those parties are still around, but they're in different positions. And now this whole thing can happen, and AEW's established itself, right? Like, I would have been shocked if New Japan got into a relationship with AEW before they ran a show.
Yeah.
That's just not how they work.
And now the other thing is, because of the pandemic, New Japan needs an American partner to bring guys in to help sell tickets to the domes. Shows.
Absolutely. And I think they've always wanted American partner. They've always had an American partner, right? Yeah. And for so long, when ROH, pre-pandemic, ROH was healthy. They were running pretty big shows. They were running, Hammerstein Ballroom, and, they were a great partner for New Japan, and they died throughout the pandemic. I mean, like, really, the pandemic killed ROH more than it killed New Japan. So yeah, I think it's a way bigger deal. And also AEW's proven that they can run these big buildings on their own. They ran United Center for Rampage. Yeah. I mean, yes, CM Punk returning, right? Like, special circumstances, but like, that's not even like I was in the building. I don't remember what matches happened on that. And I was just there because it was a big event. AEW can run big events in the US, especially in Chicago.
Then my other question, and I haven't heard anyone bring this up. I haven't heard all the discussion on this, but the timing of the show, 1 week before Money in the Bank, Do you think that is by design to try to get some buzz, maybe to try and get some of the traveling fans, try to hurt WWE, or is it just coincidence?
I think that the timing of the show, I think, is more important on the New Japan side as it will build towards the G1.
Okay.
And I don't think we will know who on the AEW side is going to participate in the G1 until this night. I think that's going to be part of the buzz building. So, and of course, I look at things through a New Japan lens, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's my lane in this whole thing. But I'm an AEW fan. I'm super attentive to what they have happening. Timing wise, though, I think like it was either now, like when they booked it, or it was August, September, and then you're into the space of All Out.
Right.
And you're probably looking at a different city even then, or you're just looking at the same weekend as All Out, and that's what you run for All Out. But I'm sure AEW's got their own, they've got their own arcs, right? So I don't know that there was another option besides waiting even longer.
Maybe just a happy coincidence.
So here's I'm already looking at Double or Nothing. Chris, are you coming to Vegas?
I don't think so.
Man.
I was trying to go. I'm trying to go to DC in a month. I might go to Vegas. I keep my options open. But now why would I ever leave Chicago, Garrett?
Yeah,
they just
I know.
keep coming to me.
Everything comes to you. Jeez.
Maybe I'll come see you in June.
So my question is related to Double or Nothing because they're more of a just wondering what you guys think. So this pay-per-view is less than a month?
It's
about
4
weeks from Wednesday.
Right?
Yeah. So you got 4 weeks of TV for AEW to build to this show. They do a really good job about not telling us what the surprises are, but allowing us to kind of build the surprises on social media for them. I would imagine there's going to be a big player from New Japan, or maybe more than one, at that show, and they don't even necessarily have to be wrestling on the show. But it would make a lot of sense to me based on how they built All Out for the next few weeks out of TV, for them to kind of create something there at that show, that giant surprise, the crowd goes nuts, and you use that to kind of kick off the next 4 weeks of television. Does that make sense to you guys?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and here's the thing. For most of May, every heavyweight that works for New Japan is pretty much wide open and available because it's Best of Super Junior season. So, and that goes all the way to June 3rd. So heavyweights, which is why all these heavyweights are coming in for this DC show on May 14th. From then on, right?
Maybe they just stick around.
They may just stick around, right? So there may not.
I want to take Okada to a Giants game. That's what I want to do.
He would have a great time. He's a big baseball guy.
I know. That's why. Yeah. When Dave and I interviewed him, I had to throw in a baseball question, but I was just like trying to figure out, like, how do I just, create some sort of and so Seiya Suzuki, who signed with the Cubs, Giants were really high on him, and then I mentioned it to Okada and also kind of talked about Otani at the same time. So I knew that, but then you told me, didn't you say that Naito was even a bigger baseball fan?
Naito's a huge baseball fan.
Huge baseball guy. Maybe both of them. No,
maybe for the sweet party, you can get Ishii there, and you can charge $10 for him to chop people.
Oh my God! Remember, I asked Bryan Danielson about that, and he didn't remember chopping Ed's giant belly.
I heard that. Yeah, I was there. It happened.
It did. I remember it so well that I remembered the T-shirt he was wearing that day. Yeah. Okay, so I lost my train of thought because we went in a completely different direction. But I do have another question from Mel, the great Mel Gray, who Paul had recently interviewed and had on his show. She asks, what's the possibility of a Kevin Kelly, Don Callis reunion at ringside?
My understanding is that this is an AEW production.
Okay. That sucks.
I mean,
it's great, but I'd love to see Kevin Kelly on this show.
I also know that Kevin Kelly's phone is always on. not that I represent him or anything, but I can usually get a hold of him. So I'd imagine someone else who is much more important than I am would be able to get a hold of him if they wanted to.
So we were having this discussion. Who was I having this discussion with about announcers? And I think it's probably LaRocca on the one of the podcasts that I do with him. And I was talking about some of the things that Excalibur does really well. The thing that I respect about him the most is his ability to know exactly the name of every move as it's happening. Like, I don't know if that's studying or just being that so dialed into the product. I think that is fascinating to me. I could never do it. I can't even remember, certain very easy to remember moves. Like I'll see an abdominal stretch and I'll go, abdominal stretch. Like he does it so effortlessly, right? But from a big picture perspective, because he's focusing on these moves so much, I think he misses some big things, which is why having Ross there is great. And I know people, some people like to crap on Ross. And then when we were talking, I was like, or we just have Kevin Kelly who can do both things extremely well. And he's like the best guy going today. And I mean, because of what you said, AEW pay-per-view, you're not going to bring in New Japan's ace guy who is the best guy probably, unless maybe he comes in to call like one of the big matches or one or two of the big matches. But man, what a fascinating thing that would see to see Kevin Kelly call an AEW match. Like I think that would be awesome.
Yeah, well, and Kevin did a great job when he was with Ring of Honor. So Kevin, I can't speak higher of Kevin. He's great. He's great for me. He's great. He bought me a really nice hot dog when he was in Chicago. Hot dog and a handshake, so good dude. And but let's look to the future, right? The next time they do an event of this caliber is probably going to be in Japan, which means it'll be a Japanese New Japan production, which means Chris Charlton, Kevin Kelly, right? And whoever else, right? It comes along for the ride. So this is a beginning. And I don't think this is an only either, right? So, and you can look at the Ring of Honor Madison Square Garden show as a little bit of a template, but like they had everyone they could think of, they put at the announce table at some point during that show, right? I don't think they're going to do this big like rotating announcer thing, but maybe they will. Maybe, I haven't asked Kevin about whether he's coming in for it. So for all I know, they're already talking and figuring stuff out. So, but yeah, I mean, a New Japan produced show would have New Japan English announcing and would have, those guys doing shows. Some of the best commentary I've ever heard was when Kevin and Excalibur worked together. It was I think an entire New Japan Cup tour, maybe 17 or 18, maybe it was 19. Either way, they did the whole New Japan Cup or most of the New Japan Cup together, and they were a great pairing. So that would be a really cool thing to see. But my understanding is that this is an AEW production, which means I think you're going to see AEW commentary.
Could they maybe have Kevin Kelly and Chris do like a separate version for New Japan?
Well, so New Japan, in Japan, it's gonna have Japanese commentary on New Japan World. So maybe, but kind of why?
Get a few more bucks. People want to hear Kevin Kelly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they would do it. And I'm sure they're both looking at how to get to Chicago, right? So, because I think that would be one of the better things to do, is to have kind of both sides at the table to tell the stories that are going on, because they're intricate. I mean, like, even though Kevin and Chris, I know they don't get notes from New Japan booking or production or anything, but they can. You're there. You can sit and you read between the lines of what's going to happen next, and you can start to tell the story. So.
No, I just said I mentioned JR. I love JR. Tony he's mailing it in a very nice way, because I don't think he really adds much to the broadcast except for that he's just a likable dude. But I also know how stubborn JR could be in calling the New Japan stuff, right? Like he's done New Japan shows before for American television, and people have their opinions on how well he did, but he is not going to watch hours and hours and hours of footage to make sure that he knows everything that is going on correctly. He just wants to call it fresh as if he doesn't know what's going on. I do think that could be a problem with the broadcast and could be frustrating for AEW viewers.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, JR's polarizing. I mean, right. People feel about JR how they feel about JR. When JR was doing New Japan, or when he started doing New Japan, he was, I know first and second hand that he was very willing to accept research and accept help, right?
Accept help, not do the research, but get help from people for sure.
And I would only imagine, and honestly, anytime a New Japan guy shows up on here's where Tony Schiavone comes into play here. Every time a New Japan guy shows up on AEW, Tony's the one with the little nuggets about that New Japan guy, and they're probably coming from Tony Khan or Mookie or whoever's doing.
They're not coming from you.
Nobody's calling. I don't know if they can afford me. Do they have hot dogs at AEW?
They don't. Here's a hot tip.
White Claws.
Hot tip for Jim Ross, for Tony Schiavone. Come Forbidden Door pay-per-view. I'm gonna flash this again. Find Chris. Find Chris's website, sportofprowrestling.com. Find him on Twitter. Utilize Chris because he is going to enhance your broadcast with his information. That's just my little PSA there.
DM him for his Vimo information.
Just a hot dog. We'll be in Chicago. Portillo's is down the street from the United Center.
Okay, so we're going to wrap this up in a second here, but you mentioned the Madison Square Garden show, which I was there. It was a great event. That building is fantastic. Now, I imagine WWE has a little bit more of a foothold on it these days because they're running it a lot more. But that would have been a great idea to run AEW and New Japan back in that Madison Square Garden show, or back in Madison Square Garden, because, what a landmark event that was. And then all of a sudden, we create this frustration with WWE all over again. But I wonder if there was any thought of doing it there.
I would imagine so, because New Japan loves New York, and historical buildings, right? And the United Center is not quite that, obviously, right? And New Japan has retained a relationship with Madison Square Garden. They were going to run it in August of 2020. Themselves, when they were a hot product, as hot as they've ever been, and they were going to run, what the hell were they going to call that show? Wrestle Dynasty. And then they obviously canceled that pandemic, and at that time they said, we'll run a show in 2021, and 2021 wasn't, what anyone wanted it to be either. So I don't know how long that will stretch out, but I think that New Japan was clearly willing to go through whatever paces they need to run Madison Square Garden. So maybe that's a benefit AEW ends up getting out of this whole thing if they want to do another one of these big shows in the US. I do think it'll bounce back and forth. I think the next big one will be in Japan, but I think that once they come on back, why not Madison Square Garden? I know that the AEW side really likes Arthur Ashe, though. When it comes to New York, it's kind of like
they're trying to make that their own.
Yeah, which is that, and if they have that and the United Center and I guess the Forum or whatever big space they want to do now, those are fine buildings to have as your home bases.
Rogers Center too would be another one in Toronto.
Paul, did you have anything else?
Yeah,
I have a couple more comments I'm going to add, but I wanted to give you the last.
I got a question for you, Garrett.
Okay,
because you're all about the you're fascinated by the battle between WWE and AEW and that Nick Khan and Tony Khan and Vince. And so what do you think, if anything, and Chris, if you have any thoughts you could add too, but what do you think WWE might do now to try to counteract this? Because they will. Or are you?
Yeah,
I would
that's an
assume they will.
interesting question. They tried supposedly with when Bryan Danielson was going to leave, right? Like, I don't know if Chris how much Chris knows about that story, but I only know what Dave has said publicly about the situation, about how Nick Khan said, yeah, we'll try to open up something and do partnership there. Obviously, Danielson still left, so they didn't have to do it. I kind of wonder if they think that this is not as important to their business outside of AEW adding another pay-per-view to their calendar, because they've been AEW's been pretty consistent in the 5 shows or whatever that they do. Now this is a 6th show. It's going to gain it's going to gain a lot of publicity for them in some way, but I wonder if the WWE goes, well, they're running United Center, but we're in Vegas, and then we're in the stadium in Tennessee. That's sort of the difference between the two companies. I do wonder if they're going to react, and I don't know what that would be, because it's not going to be a talent thing, because they've already proven that they don't really respect the international talent that they already have. I mean, we saw the whole Kushida thing, which was driving me nuts. The Kushida and the Ikemenjiro situation, there was some real bad racial stuff going on in those stories, and it was like nobody was saying anything, and I'm like, this is a problem. Like, we should not have this stuff on TV in 2022. I just don't know if they see that as a big thing. But Chris, wonder about your thoughts.
I think it was announced so close to the date that I don't know that they're going to have an opportunity to really counter program it. 2 months is a long time, but WWE's calendar is pretty set. So in that sense, I don't think they're going to counter program it, but I think that WWE never got any sort of stronghold in Japan. And they're a very niche wrestling product in Japan, because there's so many, I guess, non-niche wrestling products in Japan. So that's definitely not a priority of theirs. And then, when it comes to US business, they're already doing their best against AEW to counteract their growth. And if their fan base and Twitter is any indication of how WWE feels about it, this is just fan service for AEW fans, and this is not actual growth for them, which is, you can take that for what it is. They're still going to sell at the United Center and sell a bunch of pay-per-views that they wouldn't have sold otherwise. Even if they're only getting half the money, that's still half of a lot. Yeah. So I if I'm WWE, I stay the course and say I'm doing just fine, and our product is what it is, and AEW can gobble up all the partnerships, because a partnership with WWE, there's a clear leader with that, no matter who's partnering with them, and at least with AEW, you got some question of how the booking's going to go.
Yeah. All right, just add a couple of comments before we get out of here from the folks watching the live stream. I'm actually not sure who this person is, but it said John Pollock was the guy helping JR. He said as much in one of his podcasts when he had John on as a guest. John, I'm sure, was one. There were others as well.
JR took a lot. JR was super willing to receive notes and feedback and things of the sort. JR is not
smart, which was very smart.
Absolutely. And it's I personally believe it's smart of any broadcaster to take any notes from me. But yeah, I mean, like, I think that that's always been the case with pro wrestling and broadcast. So, but I'm sure John had plenty to do with that as well.
All right, last one is from our friend Lou. And I think this sort of relates to every faction that currently has a little bit of crossover. Just do you think they will bring in Suzuki-gun as a faction for the show, since AEW has Archer?
I think that'd be probably the group to bring in if you were bringing in a whole group, because Suzuki's so over in America, and people love Zack Sabre Jr. and he's a great mouthpiece. Dookie can do whatever it is he wants to do that day and jump off of something. So yeah, absolutely. I think that
I even have a match I proposed. It was Suzuki and Archer against Swerve and Keith Lee.
Yeah,
like for an undercard match.
Yeah.
And then Danielson and Moxley against the Dangerous Trekkers. Like I want to see that one.
Oh, that sounds fun. That'd be cool.
For one of the tag team titles.
Yeah, or just to do it.
Or just to do it, yeah.
Yeah.
Because then you get Danielson and Zack Sabre in the same match, which can build to a singles match down the road.
Builds to their inevitable G1 match a month later, sure.
Yeah.
You have some Instagram DM access to Tony Khan, don't you, Paul? Shoot him a couple notes.
A quick one. Do you think that AEW airs any of the G1 matches on their TV if they have AEW guys in them?
No.
No? Oh, okay.
I don't think so. I just don't think I think AEW does a really good job balancing the live experience versus the TV show.
Yeah. That would be the part
so
unless it was on Rampage.
Yeah.
Remember a few years ago, they kicked off the G1 in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
If there is a little bit, if there is somebody who's possibly in the US at the time, maybe they could kick off the G1 or and talk about New Japan World with a match, couple weeks before the G1 actually really starts or something. Like that would be interesting.
Yeah, and the G1 schedule is a little wacky. There's an extra date, so it's hard to figure out exactly what they're. Yeah, I mean, I'm a math guy, and I can't figure out how all the blocks.
That would be cool, honestly, to have like a day of G1 on Dynamite. Like I don't know if it's feasible, but that would be the best of both worlds, because then you can drive subscriptions to NJPW World. You get these guys on American TV. Like.
It would be cool.
I'd do that if I could figure it out how to do it.
I think that's pretty unlikely just based on how things work with New Japan. Yeah. And let's not forget, New Japan has Access TV. They have television in the US, and I think that they're working really hard to try to get the G1 get the product almost up to date for when the G1 is happening, so that they can then leverage the G1 to drive some TV ratings. So
they're not that far behind. I watched that show, and they're doing New Japan Cup stuff right now.
Yeah, so, I think Thursday was the New Japan Cup semis, which means probably next week is the finals, and there hasn't been that much between now and then. So they should be caught up by then, which I think is probably the goal.
Awesome.
All right, Chris, thanks again. I love it when we get a chance to chat. There's the Twitter handle at the Chris Samsa. Check out his website, sportofprowrestling.com. And anything else you want to plug?
No, that's it. You nailed it for me.
All right, Paul?
Just the regular stuff. In the Clinch on Fight Game Media Network, and Dynamite Show on the Patreon. I haven't got any guests lined up for next week for Grandpa Dez, but I got some stuff in mind. Got to get Chris on at some point. I've been trying to do 1 or 2 shows every week, and we're going to start bringing back some past favorites. And everyone, if you haven't bought your tickets to Vegas yet, go to Double or Nothing.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun time.
Yeah,
it's going to be a really fun time. All right, so thank you to Chris for jumping on here with us. As always, thanks to Paul for doing this with me. I'm Double G. We'll see you when we see you. Peace out.